"Don't touch him! You're senile!" The groom's brother screamed as I knelt beside his father on the ballroom floor. I didn't answer him. I had learned a long time ago that answering the loudest man in an emergency only gave panic a second mouth. The old man under my hands was turning gray beneath the chandeliers, his silk tie crooked against his throat, one polished shoe scraping weakly against the marble as 300 wedding guests sat frozen with forks in their hands and champagne glasses halfway to their lips. The band had stopped playing. The bride had one hand pressed over her mouth. My daughter Carol was standing 5 feet away from me, her face tight with the kind of embarrassment that had become more familiar to me than affection. And behind the groom's brother, the wedding videographer's camera was still recording, that little red light blinking like an accusation. I said, "Get away from him!" Todd shouted again. "Somebody move her before she hurts him." I looked up at him once, just long enough to see the confidence on his face. He was a big man in an expensive tuxedo, broad-shouldered, red-cheeked from bourbon. The kind of man who had spent his whole life believing volume was the same thing as command. In Kandahar, men like that usually lasted about 30 seconds before someone calmer had to drag them behind cover. But no one in that ballroom knew anything about Kandahar. To them, I was just Carol's elderly mother, the quiet woman she had seated near the kitchen doors so I wouldn't be too visible in the family photographs. I was the woman she had warned the bride's family about in a soft, apologetic voice. Mom gets confused sometimes. Mom means well. Mom can get anxious in crowds. If she says anything strange, just ignore it. That was the version of me they had been given before the first glass of champagne was poured. So when Richard Whitmore, the groom's father, dropped in the middle of his toast, and I was the first person to move, they did not see instinct. They saw inconvenience. They saw an old woman ruining a beautiful wedding. They saw the problem Carol had spent the entire day trying to hide. Richard's face had changed before anyone else noticed. That was the thing people never understood about emergencies. They almost never arrived with music and screaming. Most of the time, they started quietly. A hand pressed to the chest, a cough swallowed too quickly, a smile that stopped reaching the eyes. A man pausing in the middle of a sentence while his body made a decision his pride could not admit. Richard had been standing beneath an arch of white roses, holding his champagne flute, and telling his son that marriage was not about finding someone perfect, but finding someone whose storms you were willing to weather. People had laughed politely at that. His wife had dabbed at her eyes. Then his voice had thinned. His left hand had gone to his collar. His lips had parted like he wanted air and couldn't find it. Around me, people kept smiling because the room had not yet been given permission to panic. I pushed back my chair before the glass hit the floor. Carol caught my wrist. "Mom," she whispered, sharp enough that it almost sounded like love. "Please don't." I looked at her hand on me, then at Richard. His knees buckled. The champagne flute shattered. That sound finally woke the room. Chairs scraped. Someone screamed his name. The bride's bouquet slipped from her fingers, and I moved. Not fast like a young woman, not pretty, not graceful, but directly. There is a difference. I crossed the space between the back table and the center of that ballroom while half the guests were still deciding whether to stand. By the time Todd got to his father, he was already making things worse, grabbing Richard under the arms, shaking him, shouting, "Dad? Dad, look at me!" As if a man fighting for breath could obey family authority. I lowered myself beside Richard and put 2 fingers where they needed to go. Weak. Wrong. Not gone yet. That mattered. Move back, I said. Todd stared at me like I had spoken another language. What? Move back. My voice was not loud. It did not have to be. For 1 second, something in the old command tone must have cut through the room because Todd actually shifted. Then he remembered who he thought I was. His eyes dropped to my gray hair, my plain navy dress, the small purse still hanging from my wrist, the hands he assumed shook because of age, and not because they had once carried men twice his size through dust and fire. "No," he snapped. "No, absolutely not. Don't touch him, you're senile." The word hit the room harder than the falling glass. Senile. Not confused. Not elderly. Not mistaken. Senile. The kind of word people use when they want to close the door on you while pretending it is for your own safety. I heard a few guests inhale. I heard Carol whisper, "Todd," but she did not step forward. She did not defend me. She had spent too many months building that word in smaller pieces to object when someone finally said it whole. Richard made a sound under my hands, low and wet and terrified. That was the only answer I needed. "Call emergency services," I said, without looking away from him. Nobody moved. They were all waiting for someone younger, someone official, someone wearing a badge, someone whose usefulness had not expired in their minds. I looked up and pointed at a bridesmaid with a phone already in her hand. "You call now." Speaker on. She blinked, then obeyed. I pointed to a waiter standing near the wall. "You, ask the front desk for an AED." "Run." He ran. Todd's mouth opened, but I cut my eyes toward him and said, "If you love your father, stop talking." That was when the room changed. Not fully, not yet, but enough. The laughter that had followed me all afternoon died in the corners. The people who had watched Carol guide me around like a fragile object began to see something they had not been told to expect. My hands were steady, my voice was flat, my eyes were not lost, and the black trauma shears inside my purse, the same old pair Carol had begged me not to bring because they looked ugly and dramatic, pressed against my wrist like a memory. I had not heard my call sign in 17 years. I had buried it under folded flags, closed records, sleepless nights, and polite smiles at family dinners where nobody asked why I always sat facing the door. I had let Carol call it anxiety. I had let strangers call it age. I had even let myself believe, on tired mornings, that maybe the world no longer had any use for the woman I used to be. But less than 9 minutes later, a trauma surgeon would push through the crowd. Look at the way I had organized that ballroom. Look at the shears in my hand, and stop so suddenly that the paramedic behind him nearly ran into his back. He would stare at me like a ghost had risen from the marble floor. Then, in front of the bride, the groom, my daughter, Todd, and every guest who had just heard me called senile, he would ask me the one question nobody in my family had ever cared enough to ask. "Mom," he would say, his voice breaking. "What was your call sign?" And when I answered, Carol's face would go white before the doctor even explained why the name Mercy 6 meant Richard Whitmore was still alive. Before I tell you what happened when the surgeon heard my call sign, tell me where you're watching from. I always like knowing how far stories like this travel, especially stories people tried very hard to bury. Because Carol did not start calling me senile in a ballroom. She was too careful for that. My daughter had always understood the power of small words, said in soft rooms. She started with harmless ones, forgetful, tired, a little anxious, not herself lately. Words that sounded like concern if you did not know where she placed them. She said them to waiters when I asked where the nearest exit was. She said them to neighbors when I paused too long before answering a question. She said them to my granddaughter when I corrected the way she stored a kitchen knife with the blade facing out. "Grandma notices everything," Carol would say with a laugh that asked other people to laugh too. "It's from all those old army stories." She can't really turn it off, but I noticed the way her laughter changed over time. At first, it was embarrassment. Then it became explanation. Then it became permission. Permission for other people to dismiss me before I spoke. Permission for clerks to look at her instead of me when we stood at a counter. Permission for relatives to lower their voices when I entered a room, as if age had taken my hearing along with my authority. I never corrected them because correction is wasted on people who have already decided what version of you is most useful to them. And the version of me Carol needed was simple. Fragile mother, confused mother, mother who should not manage her own appointments, mother who should not drive at night, mother who should let her daughter handle the paperwork, the phone calls, the accounts, the decisions. It was not one betrayal. It was 1,000 polite adjustments. A chair pulled too far from the conversation. A menu taken from my hand before I finished reading. A doctor's question answered by Carol while I sat there with my own blood in my veins and my own mind behind my eyes. The first time she signed my name on a hospital intake form, she smiled at the receptionist and said, "It's easier if I do it. Mom gets overwhelmed." I looked at the pen in her hand and thought of all the forms I had filled out under fluorescent lights while helicopters shook dust from the ceiling. Casualty tags, supply requests, transfer notes, death notifications. I had written men's names with blood drying on my cuffs and coordinates still ringing in my ears. But in that waiting room, my daughter decided I was too overwhelmed to write Margaret Ellis on a clipboard. I let her do it, not because I was weak, because I wanted to see how far she would go when nobody stopped her. That was something command teaches you early. Never interrupt a person who is revealing their position. Carol had been revealing hers for almost 2 years by the time of that wedding. She had called my bank just to help. She had asked about power of attorney, just in case. She had printed articles about assisted living communities and left them on my kitchen table with little yellow notes that said things like, "Only thinking about your safety, Mom." Safety. That was another word people used when they wanted control to sound like love. The truth was that I was careful, not confused. I checked exits because exits mattered. I noticed who was limping because pain changed behavior. I watched hands because hands told you more than mouths ever did. I asked where the AED was in restaurants, churches, school gyms, hotels, and once at a Christmas concert where Carol nearly sank through the floor from embarrassment. "Mom!" she hissed afterward, gripping my elbow as if I were a child who had wandered too close to traffic. "You can't ask people things like that. It makes them uncomfortable." I told her, "Emergencies are uncomfortable." She said, "This is what I mean." I remember that sentence because it was the first time I understood. She had stopped seeing my habits as survival and started using them as evidence. After that, every practical question became a symptom. If I asked a server whether peanuts were in a sauce because my grandson had an allergy, Carol apologized for me. If I moved a candle away from a curtain, she touched my shoulder and said, "Mom worries." If I sat with my back to a wall, she told people crowds made me nervous. Nobody asked why. Nobody wanted the real answer. The real answer would have required them to imagine a younger version of me moving through smoke with a medical bag cutting into my shoulder. listening for the difference between fear and injury, between screaming and dying, between a man who needed comfort and a man who needed pressure held on an artery before his body emptied itself into the dust. So they accepted Carol's answer because it was cleaner. Old women get nervous. Old women repeat themselves. Old women carry strange things in their purses. That last one became a family joke because of the trauma shears. They were black, dull at the hinge from years of use, with one blade slightly nicked near the tip. I kept them wrapped in a soft cloth inside the inner pocket of my purse. Carol hated them. She hated the look of them, the weight of them, and most of all, the questions they invited. "You don't need those anymore," she told me the morning before the wedding, standing in my bedroom doorway while I packed tissues, mints, reading glasses, and the small silver service pin I had planned to wear on my dress. I looked up and saw her watching my hands. I might. She exhaled through her nose, the way people do when they want patience to look like virtue. "Mom, it's a wedding. People have emergencies at weddings. People also stare when an 80-year-old woman pulls military scissors out of her handbag." I folded the cloth around them anyway. Then they'll have something to do while they wait for help. Carol stepped into the room and picked up my service pin from the dresser before I could attach it. It was small, nothing dramatic, just a quiet piece of metal with more years inside it than shine left on it. Her thumb rubbed over the edge. "Maybe not this today," she said. "Why?" "Because the Whitmores don't really know that side of the family yet, and I don't want the day to become about old war stories." I almost laughed because Carol had never once asked for an old war story. Not a real one. Not the kind that stayed under your skin after people stopped clapping for service. She liked the clean version, the one she could mention on Veterans Day, with a flag emoji and a photograph where I looked proud but not haunted. She did not want the version that woke before dawn because the house had settled too loudly. She did not want the version that counted exits in ballrooms. She did not want the version that could look at a man's face from 30 feet away and know his body was running out of time. So I let her take the pin. I let her place it inside a small jewelry box as if she were protecting me from embarrassment. Then I slipped the trauma shears into my purse while she was looking at the mirror behind me. Some habits survive because they are stubborn. Others survive because they were paid for in lives. By the time we arrived at the hotel, Carol had her arm linked through mine, smiling at guests and guiding me with the careful pressure people use on decorative objects. "This is my mother, Margaret," she said again and again. "She's having a big day, so we're keeping things easy for her." Easy meant I was not in the front row. Easy meant I was not in the family photographs until someone remembered me after the formal shots were done. Easy meant my place card had been moved from table 3 to table 14, near the kitchen doors where servers came and went carrying trays over my shoulder. When I asked the young man pouring water whether the hotel had an AED on this floor, Carol's smile stiffened so hard I thought it might crack. "Mom," she whispered, "please." The waiter looked uncertain. I said, "It's a simple question." Carol laughed for him. She used to be in the army. She still thinks she's in charge of every building she enters. The waiter smiled because she had told him how to understand me. That was how it worked. She translated me before I spoke. She softened me until I disappeared. And I sat there at table 14, with my back to the wall, my purse against my knee, my trauma shears tucked inside, watching the room fill with people who believed I had been placed there for my own good. Across the ballroom, Richard Whitmore adjusted his tie and smiled at me as if he saw a person instead of a problem. I remember thinking that made him either kind or observant. By the end of the night, I would learn he was both. The first humiliation of that wedding was not where they seated me. It was what Carol made sure I did not wear. People think disrespect always arrives loudly, with slammed doors and cruel names, but the kind that lasts usually comes wrapped in reason. Carol did not say she was ashamed of my service pin. She said the day was about the bride. She did not say my past made her uncomfortable. She said the Whitmores were elegant people, and she did not want anyone asking questions that might tire me out. She did not say she wanted me invisible. She said, "Let's keep everything simple." So I stood in my bedroom mirror that morning, with an empty place on my dress where the pin should have been, and I watched my daughter put a small part of my life into a jewelry box, like she was putting away something sharp. At the hotel, she continued simplifying me. She simplified my name into my mother, Margaret. She simplified my alertness into nerves. She simplified my silence into decline. She simplified my whole existence until all that remained was an old woman in a navy dress who needed to be guided to a safe corner and kept from saying too much. The ballroom had been arranged like a magazine photograph, all white roses and gold chairs and polished silverware catching the light from chandeliers, big enough to look borrowed from a palace. At the front, near the arch of flowers, the family tables were marked with cream cards written in black script. Carol and her husband were at table 3. The bride's mother was at table 2. The Whitmores were at table 1, close enough to touch the hem of the bride's dress when she passed. My card, I later learned, had also been at table 3 when the first seating chart was printed. I know because I saw the old version folded in the planner's binder when she opened it too quickly near the entrance. My name had been crossed out in blue ink and moved by hand. Table 14, back left, near the service doors. There was nothing accidental about it. Carol saw me see it. For half a second, her face tightened. Then she smiled. "It'll be quieter there, Mom," she said. "You'll be more comfortable." Comfortable was the word people used when they had already decided you did not belong in the center of the room. I looked toward table 14. A speaker stand blocked part of the view. A waiter's station sat behind it, stacked with folded napkins and pitchers of water. Every time the kitchen doors opened, the smell of steam and butter rolled over the chairs. It was not a bad table for a stranger. It was a very clear table for a mother. "I can sit wherever you need me," I said. Carol's shoulders lowered with relief because she mistook discipline for surrender. The bride's mother, Elaine, joined us before Carol could answer. Elaine was the sort of woman who held a glass like it had been designed specifically to prove breeding. She kissed the air beside my cheek and said, "Margaret, we are so glad you could make it." Carol told us big events can be a little much for you. Did she? I asked. Carol's smile sharpened. Elaine nodded with sympathy, so practiced it had no warmth left in it. Weddings are emotional. We completely understand if you need to step out during the speeches. There it was. The second simplification. I was not even in my seat yet, and they were already creating a path for me to disappear if I became inconvenient. "I don't plan to interrupt any speeches," I said. Elaine laughed lightly, as though I had made a sweet little joke. Of course. Then she leaned closer to Carol, not quite quietly enough, and added, "We'll skip the open microphone portion just to keep things smooth." Carol murmured, "Thank you. I think that's wise." I looked at my daughter then, really looked at her. Not as the child I had raised, not as the one who still knew exactly which tone to use when she wanted me to feel unreasonable. I looked at her the way I used to look at a road before a convoy moved through it. Not with anger, with assessment. She had planned this, not all of it perhaps, but enough. No pin, no front table, no speech, no opportunity to be remembered as anything but the version of me she had already sold. Todd Whitmore made his entrance into my day about 5 minutes later, carrying a drink, before the ceremony had even begun and smiling, with the easy cruelty of a man who had never paid full price for the damage he caused. He was Richard's younger son, the groom's brother, and he had the kind of loud friendliness that allowed him to insult people, while making everyone else feel rude for noticing. Carol introduced us near the bar. "Todd, this is my mother." Todd bent slightly at the waist, not out of respect but performance. "Well, hello there, Mom. Big day for you, huh?" "For the bride and groom," I said. He grinned at Carol over my head. Sharp one. Carol gave a small laugh, the nervous kind she used when she wanted to keep a powerful person comfortable. Todd noticed my purse then, or more precisely, the shape of the wrapped shears when I adjusted the strap. "What's in there?" he asked. "You packing garden tools?" "Something like that." "Mom carries all sorts of things," Carol said quickly. "You never know what she'll decide is necessary." Todd's grin widened. "Oh, I get it. Survival kit. Flashlight, canned beans, maybe a little radio for the bunker." He laughed harder because silence makes men like Todd nervous, and nervous men often try to fill the room before anyone can hear it. Later, at table 14, the joke grew legs. One of the bridesmaids had a loose thread on her dress and asked if anyone had scissors. I reached into my purse out of habit, not thinking about the audience Carol had built around me, and unfolded the black trauma shears from their cloth. Conversation stopped just long enough for Todd, passing behind my chair with another drink in hand, to see them. "Whoa," he said, loud enough for 3 tables to turn. "What are you planning to do? Perform surgery between the salad and the cake?" A few people laughed because Todd had given them permission. Carol's face flushed. "Mom," she whispered, "put those away." I held the shears out to the bridesmaid, handle first. "They'll cut thread." The girl took them carefully, trimmed the loose strand, and handed them back with a polite, uncertain smile. Todd leaned one hand on the back of an empty chair. "Seriously, though, are those military or something?" "Old?" I said. "Like me." More laughter, gentler this time, because I had offered them a safe way out. Todd did not take it. "You hear that?" he called toward the groom's table. Carol's mom brought battlefield scissors to a wedding. Carol stood quickly. "Todd, she was just being helpful." But she said it in the tone of apology, not defense. There is a difference, and I heard it. I wrapped the shears again and placed them back in my purse. Todd watched the movement. "Relax, Vietnam," he said. "This is a wedding, not a war." The room gave him another laugh, bigger this time, because the joke had a country in it, and men like Todd believed. History was something you could use without understanding. I did not correct him. I did not tell him Vietnam was not my war. I did not tell him the dust I remembered was Afghan. The heat, more recent, the screams carried through radio static and rotor wash instead of old newsreel footage. I did not tell him that men bled the same, no matter what map their sons later misunderstood. I only looked at him until his smile thinned. "What?" he said. "Nothing. You always this serious, only when people are careless." His eyes cooled, but before he could answer, a waiter came to refill the water glasses, and I asked the question that finished turning me into the evening's quiet joke. "Does the hotel keep an AED on this floor?" The waiter paused. "I'm not sure, Mom. Can you find out?" Carol closed her eyes for 1 second. Elaine, 2 tables away, saw the exchange and lifted her brows as if my decline had just been confirmed in public. Todd slapped the back of the chair and laughed. "An AED? Lady, the most dangerous thing in here is the open bar. People can need help anywhere," I said. "At a wedding? Especially at a wedding. Alcohol, emotion, tight collars, older guests, heavy meals, dancing." Todd stared at me, then looked around as if inviting the room to witness how exhausting I was. "You hear this? She's doing a threat assessment on the reception." Carol came to my side, her hand landing on my shoulder with gentle pressure that meant stop. "Mom, please? You're making people uncomfortable." I looked at the waiter. He looked at Carol. Then he looked away. That was the real answer. Not that he did not know where the AED was, that he had been taught in 10 seconds whose discomfort mattered. I sat back in my chair. "All right," I said. Carol squeezed my shoulder once, grateful that I had become manageable again. But across the ballroom, Richard Whitmore was watching us. He had not laughed at Todd's Vietnam joke. He had not laughed at the shears. He had not looked away when Carol corrected me. He simply raised his glass a little in my direction. A small private gesture from one person at the front of the room to another near the kitchen doors. I gave him the smallest nod back. At the time, I thought it was kindness. Later, when his hand went to his throat and the whole room waited for someone younger to sieve him, I would remember that nod more clearly than the flowers, the music, or every cruel laugh that came before it. Richard Whitmore found me during the soup course, which told me more about him than any toast ever could have. Important men at weddings usually moved toward other important men. They shook hands near the bar, laughed too loudly, beside the photographer, let younger relatives orbit them like proof of status. Richard did none of that. He came to table 14 with his jacket buttoned, his silver hair combed neatly back, and his champagne glass held low at his side as if he had not forgotten where the edges of the room were. "Mrs. Ellis," he said. "Not Margaret, not Carol's mother, Mrs. Ellis. Respect is sometimes nothing more than using the name a person has earned. I stood because old habits rise faster than old knees. Mr. Whitmore," he smiled. "Richard, please. If we are going to share a family after tonight, I think we can survive first names." I almost told him families were not shared by ceremonies. They were proven by behavior, but he had kind eyes, and kind eyes were rare enough that I had learned not to punish them for arriving late. He pulled out the chair beside me and sat without looking around to see who approved. That alone made 3 people at nearby tables glance over. Carol saw it from across the room immediately. Her smile did not drop, but it tightened at the corners. Richard noticed that too. I could tell by the way his eyes moved and returned. "I hope they are taking good care of you back here," he said. "I'm close to the kitchen," I replied. "Fastest table in the room if the cake catches fire." He laughed, not because he was supposed to, but because he heard the dry edge of the joke. "Then I'm sitting with the safest woman here." It was such a simple sentence. Harmless, probably, to him. But after a day of being guided, apologized for, corrected, hidden, and softened into something manageable, being called safe instead of fragile almost made me look away. Richard's gaze dropped to my wrist then, to the pale scar that crossed near the base of my thumb where the skin had never healed quite smooth. I saw the question form and waited for the usual mistake. People liked scars when they came with clean stories. Kitchen accident, gardening tool, childhood fall. Something small enough to make them comfortable again. Richard did not guess. He only said, "That looks like it had a story behind it. Most scars do. Do you want to tell it?" "No." He nodded once, accepting the boundary without bruising himself against it. "Fair enough." That was when I decided I liked him. Not because he was charming. Charm had always cheap. I liked him because he understood that a closed door did not have to be kicked in to prove you had seen it. He looked toward the head table, where his son was laughing with the bride, then back at me. "Carol mentioned you served." My eyes moved to my daughter before I could stop them. She was still watching us. Carol mentions the version that fits the room. Richard took that in slowly. And which version is this room getting? The quiet one. He did not smile that time. He lifted his glass just slightly and said, "Then I'm glad the quiet one made it home." The words landed harder than they should have. Not because they were dramatic, but because they did not ask anything from me. They did not demand pride. They did not dress pain in patriotism. They simply left space for what returning sometimes cost. For a moment, the ballroom softened around us. The clatter of silverware, the soft music, the perfume, the flowers, even Todd's voice booming somewhere near the bar, all of it moved farther away. I looked at Richard and saw a man who had lived long enough to know that celebration and grief often sat at the same table. "You have a good son," I said, watching the groom lean down to kiss his bride's forehead. Richard followed my gaze. "I do." Then, after a pause, "And I have one who still thinks volume is a substitute for character." I did not have to ask which one. Todd chose that moment to prove his father right. He appeared behind Richard with a drink in one hand and his phone in the other, already talking before he reached us. "Dad, there you are. I thought we lost you to the retirement section." His eyes slid to me. "No offense." "Then don't offer it," Richard said mildly. Todd blinked, surprised that his father had corrected him in front of someone he had already decided was safe to mock. "I'm joking, I know." Richard's tone did not change. "That's what concerns me." The air tightened. Todd's smile stayed in place, but his jaw moved. Carol arrived half a breath later, because people who manage appearances can smell tension across a crowded room. "Everything all right?" she asked brightly. "Perfect," Todd said. "Dad's just making friends with General Grandma here." Carol's eyes flashed to me, then to Richard, then to the guests nearby. "Todd, what?" She asked about defibrillators and brought combat scissors. "I'm just saying, if the centerpiece attacks, we're covered." A few people laughed again, smaller this time. Richard did not. "Enough," he said. That single word did more to expose Todd than any insult could have. His face reddened, not with shame, but with the insult of being restrained. He leaned closer to his father. "Relax. It's a wedding. Then behave like you were invited to one." Carol touched my chair. Not Todd's arm, not Richard's shoulder. My chair. As if I were somehow still the thing needing correction. "Mom, maybe we should get some air. I'm comfortable. You look tired." "You look worried." Her smile froze. Richard looked down into his glass, hiding whatever expression crossed his face. Todd laughed under his breath. "Oh, she's got bite." Carol bent near my ear, voice low enough for privacy, sharp enough for obedience. "Please do not make this about you." I turned my head and met her eyes. "I haven't." That was the part she hated most. My calm. If I had cried, she could have managed me. If I had shouted, she could have confirmed her warnings. But calm gave her nothing to hold up as evidence. Across the table, Todd watched the exchange with new interest, like a man discovering a crack in a wall and deciding to push his thumb into it. Richard stood then, slowly, one hand brushing the edge of the chair. I should prepare my toast. He gave me a small bow that was not theatrical enough for anyone else to notice. Mrs. Ellis. Richard. He started to leave, then paused as if remembering something. My wife used to say the quiet people were the ones you listened to when things went wrong. Smart woman. The smartest. For the first time all evening, his face changed, not dramatically. Just a flicker at the mouth, a brief shadow behind the eyes. Grief, old but not gone. Then he pressed 2 fingers lightly against the knot of his tie and cleared his throat. I saw it, the pressure, the swallow. The small pause between breath and speech. Not enough for alarm, enough for attention. He smiled again before anyone else could notice. "Wish me luck," he said. "You won't need luck if you tell the truth." He nodded, then walked toward the front of the room. If you've ever watched people mistake your silence for weakness, type silent in the comments. You'll understand why I let them keep talking. Because by then, I was no longer thinking about Carol's embarrassment or Todd's cheap jokes. I was watching Richard. I watched the way he adjusted his collar twice before reaching the microphone. I watched the way his left hand closed and opened at his side. I watched him smile at his son, raise his glass, and wait for the room to quiet. And when he began to speak, his first words were steady. His second sentence was kind. His third came thinner than it should have. By the fourth, I had already moved my purse closer to my knee. Richard stood beneath the white rose arch with the microphone in one hand and his champagne glass in the other, and for a few seconds, he looked exactly like the kind of father every groom hopes will speak at his wedding. Steady, proud, little sad, in the dignified way older men allow themselves to be sad when a son steps into a life that no longer needs them every morning. The room quieted for him without effort. Even Todd stopped talking, though he leaned against the bar with that loose grin still hanging in on his face, waiting for a joke he could turn into his own. Richard looked at his son first, then at the bride, then at the empty chair near the front, where I later learned his late wife's photograph had been placed before the ceremony and quietly removed for the reception because Elaine thought it made the room feel too heavy. When my wife and I got married, Richard began, I thought love meant protecting someone from every storm. A soft sound moved through the guests. Women's smiled. Men looked down into their drinks. The bride reached for the groom's hand. Richard smiled back at them, but his left hand rose again, brushing his collar, thumb pressing under the knot of his tie. My fingers tightened around the strap of my purse. I was wrong, he continued. His voice was still clear, but thinner now, a thread pulled too tight. Love is not keeping storms away. It is standing beside someone when the roof starts to shake. People laughed gently because they thought he was being poetic. I did not laugh. I watched the color move out of his cheeks. I watched the way his shoulders lifted, not with emotion, but with a body searching for air. I watched him swallow once, then fail to swallow again. The glass in his hand tilted. His eyes moved, unfocused, for half a second toward the far wall. To my son, he said, and then stopped. 1 second passed. 2. The groom smiled nervously, waiting for his father to gather himself. Todd called from near the bar, Don't cry yet, Dad. We haven't even cut the cake. A few people laughed. Richard tried to smile with them. That was when I stood. Carol's head snapped toward me before anyone else noticed. She had been trained by her own shame to detect my movement faster than danger. Mom, she whispered across the space between tables, a warning wrapped in my name. I did not sit down. Richard's right hand opened. The champagne flute slipped from his fingers and shattered against the marble. The sound cracked through the ballroom like a shot. The bride gasped. The groom lunged forward. Richard's knees bent wrong, and for one horrifying moment, 300 people watched an old man fall in slow motion while none of them believed it was really happening. His son caught him badly, under one arm, twisting him as they went down together. Chairs scraped backward. Someone screamed, "Richard!" The microphone hit the floor and sent a hard burst of feedback through the speakers. Then the room became noise, not action. Noise. The two are not the same. People stood. People cried out. People grabbed one another. Someone yelled for water, which is what people yell for when they want to feel useful and have no idea what usefulness requires. Todd pushed through the guests, knocking into a chair. "Dad? Dad!" He dropped beside Richard and shook his shoulder. "Dad, look at me!" "Don't shake him," I said. My voice was not loud, but it landed because I was already moving. I had crossed half the room before Carol reached me. Her hand closed around my wrist just as it had in the hospital waiting room, just as it had at the concert, just as it had all the times she mistook control for care. "Mom, don't," she said. "Carol, let go." "No, please, you are not doing this here." I looked at her, and for a heartbeat I saw the little girl she had been when thunderstorms shook the windows and she ran barefoot into my room. Then I saw the woman who had moved my place card to the kitchen doors. "A man is down." "There are other people," she hissed. "There are doctors here. There are staff. Let someone else handle it." Behind her, Richard made a sound that ended whatever patience I had left. It was not a cough. It was not drama. It was the sound of a body failing to move air the way it needed to. I pulled my wrist free. Carol stumbled half a step, more shocked than hurt. "Mom, stop. You're going to embarrass us." That was the sentence that cut the last thread. Not hurt him, not make it worse, not be careful. Embarrass us. I moved past her and lowered myself beside Richard. His face had gone gray under the warm lights, his lips losing color, his eyes open but not seeing the people above him. Todd was in the way, one hand under his father's neck, the other patting his cheek too hard. "Dad, come on! Come on! Talk to me!" "Move your hand," I said. Todd looked up, wild and angry. "What?" "Move your hand away from his neck." "Who the hell are you to give orders?" "The person watching you waste time." His face twisted. Around us, phones had appeared. I saw them lifted in trembling hands, little black rectangles catching every second. The videographer stood 10 feet away, camera still on his shoulder, red light blinking. The bride was crying into both hands. The groom was kneeling uselessly beside his father's shoes. Elaine kept saying, "Is there a doctor? Is there a doctor?" But she did not move. I reached for Richard's tie. Todd grabbed my forearm. "Don't touch him." I looked at his hand on me. "Let go." He did not. He turned toward the room, toward Carol, toward every person who had been taught all evening that I was a problem waiting to happen. And then he shouted the words so loudly even the kitchen staff froze in the service doorway. "Don't touch him, you're senile." The ballroom went still in a way panic never manages on its own. The word hung above Richard's body, above the broken glass, above my daughter's white face, above the bride's shaking shoulders, Senile. There it was again, not whispered in a clinic, not softened over a phone call, not hidden under concern. Public, clean, recorded, Carol whispered, "Todd, don't!" But she did not say he was wrong. That mattered. It mattered more than she knew. I could have answered him then. I could have told him about casualty lines and burning vehicles and the weight of a man bleeding through my sleeves. I could have told him that his father had less time than his pride. I could have told Carol that shame was a poor substitute for judgment. Instead, I let 1 full second pass, just one, long enough for the cameras to hold his face, long enough for every guest to remember who had tried to stop help, long enough for my daughter to understand that silence is not the same thing as surrender. Then Richard's hand jerked weakly against the floor, and the room came back to me with perfect clarity. The exits, the waiter near the wall, the bridesmaid with the phone, the purse against my hip, the wrapped shears inside. Todd still had his hand on my arm. I looked at him, and my voice dropped into the place it had not come from in 17 years. "Take your hand off me," I said, "or your father is going to die while you're busy being offended." His fingers loosened. Not because he respected me, because for the first time that night, he believed me. I turned away from him, opened my purse, and reached for the black trauma shears. I was done asking permission. The trauma shears felt heavier than they had any right to feel when I pulled them from my purse, not because of the metal, but because of everything that came with them. For 17 years, they had been wrapped in cloth and silence, carried through grocery stores, church basements, doctors' offices, birthday parties, and family dinners, where people joked that I was overprepared for a world that no longer needed preparing for. But the moment my fingers closed around those black handles, the ballroom disappeared in pieces and returned to me as a casualty site. Not a wedding, not a family embarrassment, not Carol's carefully arranged room of white flowers and polite lies. A casualty site, 1 man down, 1 obstructed space, too many bystanders, too much noise, no clear command. I unfolded the shears and cut through Richard's tie before anyone had time to object. The silk gave way with a short, expensive sound that made Elaine gasp as if I had damaged something more important than a man's airway. "His tie," she said, stunned. I did not look at her. "He can buy another tie." Todd was still kneeling too close, breathing hard, eyes darting between my hands and his father's face, trying to decide whether to be angry or afraid. Fear was winning, but pride had not surrendered yet. "What are you doing?" he demanded, making room for him to live. I loosened Richard's collar and slid my hand beneath his jaw, watching his chest, his mouth, the panic in his eyes. He was still there. Fading, but there. That mattered. "You," I said, pointing at the bridesmaid, whose phone was trembling in her hand. "Did you call?" "Yes," she stammered. "They're asking what happened. Put it on speaker and tell them adult male collapsed, breathing compromised, responsive but deteriorating. Tell them we need EMS to the main ballroom, east entrance." She repeated it badly, but she repeated it, and that was enough. I pointed at the waiter near the wall, the same young man and Carol had smiled into ignoring me earlier. "AED." He froze. "Mom?" "Front desk, security station, gym, conference hall." "I don't care where. Find it and run." This time he did not look at Carol. He ran. The first useful thing anyone had done all night, besides fall quiet. I pointed at 2 groomsmen standing uselessly beside the head table. "Move those chairs back. Give him space." They moved. "You in the blue dress," I said to a woman, holding a napkin to her mouth. "Keep people back." She looked behind her as though there might be another woman in blue. "Me?" "Yes, you." Arms out. No crowding. She obeyed because in an emergency people wanted permission to be helpful more than they wanted instructions to be gentle. The circle widened. Air entered the room. Not enough for Richard yet, but enough for work. Todd reached toward his father again, hand hovering, shaking now. "Dad, I'm here. I'm right here." Then help by staying out of my hands. He's my father. Then stop making him your audience. His face flinched as if I had slapped him. Good. Shock could be useful when pride was blocking comprehension. Carol was standing behind me, whispering my name in a voice that tried to pull me backward into all the old rules. Mom, please, the paramedics are coming. They are not here, but you can't just… Carol. I did not turn. Be quiet or be useful. The words struck her harder than I expected. Maybe because I had never spoken to her like that in public. Maybe because she had spent so long treating my restraint as proof that she outranked me. I heard her breath catch, but she stopped talking. That silence gave me 3 clean seconds. I used them. Richard's hand clawed weakly at the floor, his wedding ring flashing beneath the chandelier light. I leaned close enough for him to hear me under the noise. Richard, look at me. His eyes wandered. Richard, they found mine. Good. You stay with me, you hear? His lips moved, but no sound came. Blink if you understand. 1 slow blink. Still there. Good man. This old phrase came out before I could stop it. I had said it to boys younger than Todd, with dust in their teeth and terror in their faces. I had said it to men who lived and men who did not. I had learned long ago that dignity was not something you saved for healthy people standing upright. Sometimes dignity was a calm voice on the floor, telling you that you had not disappeared yet. Behind me, the room had changed again. I could feel it without looking. Panic had edges now. People were no longer screaming in every direction. They were watching my hands, watching the way I spoke, watching the way the woman they had placed near the kitchen doors had somehow become the only center the room recognized. The groom was crying silently near his father's feet. The bride held his shoulders. Elaine stood frozen with one hand at her throat, her eyes wide and wet, looking at the cut tie, the broken glass, the old shears, and me, as if the seating chart had lied to her. Todd tried once more to reach in when Richard jerked. "Don't," I said. "He's scared," Todd snapped. "So are you. That doesn't make either of you useful." His mouth opened, closed, opened again. No words came. I pointed to the floor beside me. "Kneel there. Talk to him." Calm voice. No shaking, no grabbing. "Tell him help is coming." Todd stared at me with the blank fury of a man being given a child's job in public. Then he looked at his father's face and knelt where I told him. "Dad," he said, voice breaking. "Dad, help is coming." Lower, I swallowed. "Help is coming." Better. Not good, but better. The waiter burst back through the service doors with a white AED case clutched to his chest like he had stolen it from a burning building. "Here," he shouted. "Set it down. Open it." His hands fumbled at the latch. A younger woman rushed to help him, and together they got it open. The machine began speaking in its flat, calm voice. The only other voice in the room that understood panic was wasted breath. I kept Richard's focus as much as I could, kept the circle clear, kept Todd from interfering, kept Carol silent, kept the bride from collapsing into her husband, kept the whole beautiful, useless wedding from swallowing the one ugly, necessary thing happening on its floor. Time changed shape. It always did. In emergencies, seconds stretched long enough to hold whole lives, and minutes vanished so fast you could lose a man inside one. Somewhere far away, sirens began to rise. Someone near the entrance shouted that help was here. I did not look up. Looking up too soon was how people missed the moment in front of them. Shoes hit marble. Fast. Professional. A hotel security guard came first, then 2 paramedics carrying bags, and behind them a man in a dark suit with his tie already pulled loose, moving not like a guest, but like someone who had spent his life entering rooms where fear had arrived before him. "I'm a trauma surgeon," he said, dropping beside the paramedics. "What do we have?" I gave him the summary without taking my eyes off Richard. Short, clean, no apology, no panic, no wasted words. The surgeon's hands moved toward Richard, then slowed. I felt his attention shift. Not to Richard, to me, to the cut tie, to the opened AED, to the cleared space, to the people positioned exactly where they needed to be. To the black trauma shears in my right hand. He stared at them for half a second too long. Then he looked at my face, and something changed in his. Recognition had not arrived yet, not fully, but memory had opened one eye. "Mom," he said carefully, "where did you learn to run a scene like this?" I finally looked up at him. His face was older than the one buried in the back of my mind, heavier at the jaw, lined at the eyes, but there was something in the stare that made the years fold strangely. I did not answer. Not yet. Richard was still breathing, still fighting, still more important than the past clawing its way toward the surface. "Work first," I said. The surgeon held my gaze for one more second, then nodded once, sharp and involuntary, like a man obeying a rank he had not meant to recognize. "Yes, Mom," he said, and for the first time all night, no one in that ballroom laughed. The surgeon turned back to Richard because work still came first, and that was the moment I knew he was good. Recognition could wait. Questions could wait. Pride, shock, memory, all of it could wait when a man was still fighting for the next breath. He moved with the paramedics in a clean, practiced rhythm, not pushing them aside, not performing for the crowd, just fitting himself into the emergency as if he had been part of it from the beginning. "Pulse is weak but present," one paramedic said. "Stay with me, Richard," I told him, though my voice was quieter now because the surgeon had taken the front of the fight. Richard's eyes shifted toward mine. He blinked once. "Good man." The AED kept speaking in that flat machine voice while the ballroom held itself in a silence so complete I could hear the ice melting in abandoned glasses. Todd was kneeling exactly where I had told him to kneel, no longer arguing, no longer making jokes, no longer filling the room with himself. His face had gone blotchy and damp, his hands hanging uselessly in front of him, as if he had just discovered they were not authority. Carol stood behind me with both arms wrapped around her middle, watching the surgeon listen to me without correction, watching the paramedics accept my summary, without asking whether I was confused, watching every person in that ballroom slowly revise the story she had given them. The surgeon glanced at me again while one of the paramedics adjusted the equipment. His eyes dropped to the trauma shears in my hand. Not just looked, measured, remembered. "Those are old," he said. "So am I." His mouth tightened, but it was not a smile. "Where did you get them?" "A long time ago." "Service issue?" I looked at him then, really looked. The dark suit was expensive, the face older, the hair touched with gray at the temples, but his eyes carried something younger under the years. A boy's eyes, terrified once, burning with pain, trying not to die in front of strangers. My hand closed around the shears. "Work first," I said again. He nodded, but I saw the answer land before I gave it. After another minute, Richard's color began to shift back from gray towards something living. Not healthy. Not safe enough for celebration, but present. The paramedic closest to his head said, "We need transport." The surgeon agreed. Now, as they prepared to move him, Richard's fingers found mine. Weakly, barely, I leaned close. His mouth moved without sound. "Don't talk," I said. "Save it for your son. He still needs raising." One corner of his mouth tried to move. It was enough. They lifted him onto the stretcher, and the crowd parted at last. Not like a confused group of wedding guests anymore, but like people making way for consequence. As the paramedics rolled Richard toward the ballroom doors, the surgeon stood for 1 second beside me instead of following. That 1 second was when the past finally caught him. He looked down at the shears again, then at the scar near my wrist, then at my face with a kind of fear that had nothing to do with the emergency in front of us. "Mom," he said quietly, "where did you serve?" The question moved through the room faster than any shout could have. Carol's head lifted. Todd looked up from the floor. Elaine's hand tightened around the back of a chair. I could have refused. Part of me wanted to. I had spent 17 years keeping that place sealed behind my teeth because people loved service until it became inconvenient, until it made dinner heavy, until it explained why a woman might sit facing the door and carry shears in her purse. "Somewhere hot," I said. The surgeon did not laugh. His eyes shone now. "Afghanistan?" My silence answered enough. He swallowed hard. "Kandahar?" The room seemed to pull inward. I heard the bride whisper, "What?" I heard Carol say my name, but this time it was not a warning, it was fear. The surgeon took half a step closer. "Route Violet," he said. My fingers went cold around the shears. Nobody at that wedding should have known those words. Nobody in that ballroom should have been able to reach into that buried place and touch the road where smoke had turned daylight brown. "There was a convoy hit outside Kandahar," he said, and now his voice was not the voice of a polished trauma surgeon in a dark suit. It was rougher, younger, breaking at the edges. Second vehicle rolled, fuel fire, small arms after the blast. I was pinned under the door. The marble floor beneath me seemed to tilt, though I did not move. I saw it then, not the ballroom, not the roses, not Carol's white face. I saw heat rippling off twisted metal. I saw a boy in uniform with blood on his mouth trying to tell me his mother's phone number because he thought those were the last words he would ever own. I saw my own hands, younger and faster, cutting through straps, dragging weight through dirt, shouting over rotor thunder. The surgeon's lips trembled. "You told me if I died before the bird landed, you'd be personally offended." A sound moved through the guests, not quite a gasp, not quite a sob. I closed my eyes for half a second. "You were wasting perfectly good lungs." He made a broken sound that might have been a laugh if it had not hurt so much. "I became a surgeon because of you." Todd's face changed first. The red drained out of him so quickly it left him almost gray, his mouth open, his eyes moving from me to the surgeon to the guests who had heard him call me senile. Elaine sat down hard in the nearest chair. The bride covered her mouth again, but this time she was not looking at her father-in-law. She was looking at me. Carol had not moved. Her hands were pressed flat against her dress, fingers spread like she was trying to hold herself together. The surgeon stepped closer, and his voice dropped into something almost reverent. "Mom," he said. "What was your call sign?" There it was. The name I had not heard in 17 years. The name buried under folded flags, under polite holiday posts, under Carol's soft corrections, and Todd's cheap laughter, under every room where people mistook quiet for absence. The whole ballroom waited. Even the camera light still blinked from the videographer's shoulder, catching the moment exactly as Todd had made sure it would. Public, clean, recorded. I looked at my daughter before I answered, not to punish her, to let her understand that the story she had told about me was about to meet the story I had survived. "Mercy 6, I said. The surgeon closed his eyes. One tear slipped down his cheek before he could stop it. When he opened them, he turned not to me, but to the room. "This woman pulled me out of a burning convoy outside Kandahar," he said. "I was 26 years old. I had shrapnel in my leg, smoke in my lungs, and no business surviving that road. She kept me alive until evacuation. She kept 3 of us alive." His voice steadied, and that made the words hit harder. "Everything I have done since then, every patient I have saved, every surgery I have performed, exists because she refused to let me die in the dirt." No one spoke. Not Todd, not Elaine, not Carol. The room had become so quiet that when a champagne flute rolled from under a table and tapped against a chair leg, everyone heard it. Todd tried to stand, but his knee hit the chair beside him. "I didn't know," he said. So softly it sounded like a child's excuse. I looked at him. "You didn't ask." His lips parted. Nothing came out. Carol took 1 step toward me. "Mom," that single word carried everything she wanted to put back into the bottle. Apology, fear, calculation. The desperate hope that private regret could erase public betrayal. "I was trying to protect you," she said. I almost felt sorry for her then, because she believed that sentence would still work. "No," I said. "You were trying to manage me." Her face crumpled. "I didn't want people overwhelming you." "You moved my seat. You hid my PIN. You answered for me at doctors' offices. You let people think I couldn't trust my own mind, because that made it easier for you to take my choices one at a time." The words were not loud. They did not need to be. The ballroom carried them for me. Carol looked around and found no rescue there. Every face that had politely accepted her version of me now understood they had been helping her erase someone. The surgeon wiped his cheek with the back of his hand, then straightened. "Mrs. Ellis," he said, voice formal now. "May I escort you outside? The ambulance is waiting, and I believe Mr. Whitmore would want you near when he wakes." Carol flinched at the respect in his tone. That was when I knew the evening had truly ended for her. Not when Todd shouted, not when Richard fell, not when the call sign surfaced. It ended when someone with authority treated me like I belonged to myself. I placed the black trauma shears back into their cloth and tucked them into my purse. Then I picked up the small navy jacket. Carol had insisted I keep around my shoulders all night and folded it over my arm. Without it, the empty place on my dress where the service pin should have been was visible to everyone. Maybe that was better. Let them wonder what else they had not been allowed to see. I walked past Todd first. He stepped back so quickly his shoulder struck a chair. I walked past Elaine, who could not meet my eyes. I walked past the bride and groom, and the bride whispered, "Thank you," with tears running down her face. At the ballroom doors, Carol caught up to me. "Mom, please, we're family." I stopped, but I did not turn all the way around. Family does not need a ballroom full of witnesses to remember your name. Her breath broke behind me. I kept walking. Richard survived. I rode to the hospital, not in the ambulance, but in the surgeon's car, because he said he owed me a ride that was 17 years late. By morning, Richard was awake enough to squeeze my hand and tell his son to listen better. By afternoon, Carol had called 11 times. I answered once. I told her I would be changing my emergency contact, reviewing every document she had touched, and removing her access from anything that required trust she had not earned. She cried. I let her. Tears are not payment. Regret is not repair. That week, I returned to my bedroom, opened the little jewelry box, and pinned my service pin back where it belonged. Then I placed the black trauma shears in my purse again, not because I expected gratitude, and not because I needed anyone to know who I had been. I carried them because once you need them, it is already too late to go looking. And if this story reminded you of someone who survived quietly for too long, send it to them, because they wanted a quiet old woman at the back table. What they got was Mercy 6.